back of the rim. Got it! Oh, the slam! Oh, here's a Curry way downtown. Oh, what a shot from Curry!
Chris Paul and Steph Curry are once again on a collision course in a story that has been pretty underrated, mainly because it's been one-sided. Paul hasn't really been able to get the best of Curry since he was young, before he really came up and started winning MVPs and championships. Therefore, Steph getting past him in regular season meetings and in the playoffs seems more of a formality. Except this time, Chris Paul is the reigning Western Conference champion, and the Warriors are trying to get that title back. It's particularly interesting that things have shaped up this way given what's happened in the last 6 or 7 years, and that's what we'll be reviewing in this video today. Let's throw it all the way back to 2012 when Chris Paul was traded to the Los Angeles Clippers, presumably giving him his first chance at actually winning a title. There were some decent teams in New Orleans, but nothing that was going to get them past the Spurs or Kobe Bryant. Pairing him with high-flying forward Blake Griffin and shooters at least gave him the building blocks to maybe bring home a title in the next 2 or 3 years. At that same time, no one was even paying attention to the Golden State Warriors, being that Curry was getting hurt every year, and it didn't seem like they were going to be able to get that startup off the ground. Well, that all changed in 2013. Curry and Klay Thompson began putting themselves on the map, and so did this thing between Chris Paul and Steph. You see the makings of it anytime the Clippers played the Warriors. It wasn't necessarily happening between those two, but between their teams, in which they were the leaders of, there was clearly some bad blood. There'd be shoving matches, ejections, close games, and some hope that the NBA was going to have a legitimate rivalry. Yet, as far as the NBA playoffs, that would have to wait, as the Clippers were knocked out in the first round, and the Warriors were giving the veteran Spurs a run for their money. A better run for their money than the Clippers had done just a year previously, when they were swept. So while nobody thought Steph and Golden State were contenders, they were officially on the map at least. With that being established, when LA and Golden State met in the first round of the 2014 playoffs, the stakes were high. The Warriors had already proven they could at very least play with the best of them, and Chris Paul pulled his hamstring in the first game of the series. With the Clippers missing Andrew Bogut, the teams duked it out in a grueling 7-game series in which Paul and Steph went at it. Paul on the bum leg could only manage 17 points on 42%. Meanwhile, Steph was once again leading his team with 23 and 8 on 38% from 3. One of those threes could have gone a long way and given the Warriors a 2-1 series lead had Steph not have been presumably fouled by Chris Paul at the end of that game. This one's still up for debate, but nonetheless, it's in the history books as a W for the Clippers. They go on to just barely win it in 7 at home, yet it's clear that this Warriors team has the potential to break through. Keep in mind, this was nearly a 60-win Clippers team that had the potential to be in an NBA Finals. For a young Golden State team led by Steph to have challenged them and the Spurs in consecutive years should have told the story of what was going to happen next year, yet we still weren't expecting it. And of course, when we were least expecting it, that's when it happened. The Warriors broke out to a surprise 21-2 start, which included a win over the Clippers, which would go on to them winning that season series 3-1, and also feature a couple of Steph Curry's career highlights, one being one of the most absurd threes you'll ever see taken in a basketball game, and another being one of the few times Chris Paul has ever been crossed. To this day, defectors will tell you that Paul stepped on his foot and that's why he fell, but a simple analysis of the footage will show he was already on his way down as he stepped on his foot. It was pretty symbolic of what was happening. The tides were turning, the Warriors were overtaking the Clippers and the Thunder for that matter as the next team up in the West, and Steph was on his way to overtaking Paul as the best point guard in the league. That was his first MVP year, but as the old saying goes, it's just a regular season. This Warriors team was inexperienced and they weren't ready. That's what they said. So the ultimate test was going to be the rematch of the Warriors Clippers in the 2015 playoffs. And it might have happened, except in the first round, as the Clippers were playing the defending champion Spurs, Paul once again pulled his hamstring. He was able to muster enough to get them past the Spurs, but he missed some of the beginning of the Rockets series. His team disappeared when they needed him most, and they blew a 3-1 lead. So instead of there being some massive showdown between Paul and Steph in the Western Conference Finals, it was a much less interesting series against a Rockets team that arguably should not have been there. However, that quite literally set the tone for the Steph and Paul story over the next few years. Curry would be there, Chris would not. By 2016, this had gone full speed in the other direction. Curry now had an MVP and a championship, which Paul's resume was missing, and he did it in the blink of an eye when Paul had been trying since around 2008 by that point. The 2016 Warriors do not lose a single game until December of that year, and out of their many impressive wins, one of those included an early season victory in Los Angeles against the Clippers. This was a game where LA led by double digits and seemed like they were going to give them their first loss. This is also the game where the Warriors really solidified their death lineup. It was truly the last time a Warriors and Clippers game would ever have any real suspense. The death lineup gave them the speed to defeat the Clippers without having to play at the same size. The size of DeAndre Jordan and Blake Griffin was one of the few reasons anybody believed the Clippers would have a chance. With that neutralized, the Warriors would win that game, they would sweep the Clippers in the season series, Steph Curry would become the unanimous MVP as people had all but forgotten about Chris Paul and LA. Yet, with the Warriors not having had to play the Clippers in the previous year, and playing an injured Cleveland team in the NBA Finals, there was still the detractors that wanted to see them beat LA in a playoff series. So, even though the regular season said otherwise, it was expected to be an interesting series, and it did not happen. Chris Paul would get hurt in the first round, Blake Griffin would get hurt in the first round, the Clippers would be eliminated in the first round. Steph also had the golden chance to punctuate what would have been the greatest season of all time, but we know how that one ends. And it's because it ends that way that the Warriors and Clippers saga pretty much completely ends. Off of that loss, Golden State convinces Kevin Durant to pull one of the more questionable moves in NBA history, but in any case it makes them unstoppable and definitely moves them far out of the Clippers tier, as if they weren't already out of it. There's no hope for Chris Paul, there's no hope for the Clippers, there's no hope for the league, and the Warriors cruise to a title. It's Steph's third straight finals and second championship. Chris Paul still had not made a conference final series. Paul rightfully realized if he were to ever even do that, he was going to have to leave Los Angeles. He joined Houston, which was a questionable move. We didn't exactly know how he and Harden were going to work, yet it ended up producing the greatest offense of all time. So the Rockets had a historic offense, the Warriors had a historic offense, and they were clearly the two best teams in the West, if not the NBA. On top of that, Chris Paul addition actually lands Houston above the Warriors in the standings. This sets up a Western Conference Finals between the two that's identified as a clash of titans. Although anybody is skeptical to believe that the Warriors could actually lose with Kevin Durant, the Rockets do win that season series 2-1 and at least make the playoff series build up interesting. It lived up to the hype. Despite the Rockets predictably losing Game 1, the Rockets would find themselves with a 3-2 lead with 2 chances to close it out. Only the catch is they would have to close it out without Chris Paul. Yes, it was the hamstring, and yes, this was his 4th injury in a playoff series. Things had been looking up. Chris Paul did Steph's own shimmy to him, which no doubt had some bad blood behind it. He was finally getting the upper hand, and he wouldn't even get a chance to play in the 2 most important games of his career. The Rockets would lose. That series practically was the NBA Finals. Playing the 2018 Cavs as the perspective of a Western team was basically a free ring. Instead of becoming Chris Paul's first, it became Steph Curry's third. But to Houston's credit, they picked themselves up off the mat. They weren't as good in 2019, but they kept the team together. Chris Paul fought through some injuries, but there was a Warriors and Rockets playoff rematch. And it was still interesting because by that point in the regular season and in the playoffs, Harden-led teams were the only ones that seemed to legitimately give Golden State trouble. And in this series, they would even get a handicap. Kevin Durant went down with what initially looked like an Achilles injury, but in any case, it looked severe enough that he was not going to return in this Houston series. So there was a healthy Rockets team and an unhealthy Warriors team. They were running lineups with Alfonso McKinney and Jordan Bell. However, this Warriors team was still no slouch. The starting lineup for the closeout game was the original Big Three, plus Andrew Bogut and Andre Iguodala. Those names did not hit the same as they did in 2015 or 16, but it wasn't that much of a break. That's just how good the Kevin Durant Warriors were. In any case, Chris Paul had finally caught a break that wasn't his own, and the general consensus was that if there was ever a time to defeat the Warriors, it was now. Houston did not do that, and they didn't get it to a 7th game with Chris Paul playing. Steph Curry was having a terrible half. The memes were rolling in about him disappearing in big moments. Then he proceeded to score 33 points with multiple daggers straight into the heart of a Houston team that had been their biggest and only nemesis of the Kevin Durant era. Houston went home, Steph Curry went to his 5th straight finals, Chris Paul was still without a finals appearance. In the offseason, he was sent to the Oklahoma City Thunder to die. The CP3 and Harden duo could no longer coexist, and with Paul's contract, it wasn't exactly clear how he was ever going to get back to a contending situation. Meanwhile, the entire Warriors dynasty just fell apart. Injuries happened, more injuries happened the next season, so the Paul vs. Steph teams thing was put on ice. And it remained that way for 2021. It was just that Steph was on a roster which at times didn't seem playoff worthy. Meanwhile, Paul had made his way to Phoenix. With admittedly some injuries clearing the way, the Suns made it to the finals. This was Paul's next best chance to win a championship, and he proceeded to have what was probably one of his worst playoff series. The 2-0 lead was blown, the Suns were sent home, and Chris Paul's window for a championship was thought to be officially closed. With the additions that every team made in the offseason, with their thought to be a healthy Nets team on the way, no one could fathom how this Phoenix team could put it back together for a second run. Yet here they are, on a 16-game win streak at the time of this recording, an improved roster, and just barely sitting behind the first seed to none other than Steph Curry's Golden State Warriors. At the same time that Paul is finally the reigning Western Conference champion, Steph Curry is back from what seemed to be a 2-year hiatus at the top. So although it's absolutely been one-sided, Chris Paul has never quite gotten the best of an MVP Steph Curry. It's going to be fascinating if these two can go at it just one more time, because Paul's age is getting up there. Still, he's one of the best point guards in the league, but Father Time does not fail. There's only so many next times, and it makes it feel like 2022 might be the last. So now Chris Paul is tasked with helping the Suns team not only reach the NBA Finals, but probably going through Steph Curry, which he does not have a history of doing. If he could get it done on the way to a championship, it would be some of the greatest closure to a Hall of Fame career in NBA history. However, if Golden State remained first seed and absolutely dominated Phoenix on the way to yet another NBA championship, that would just be par for the course. Either way, Paul has got a chance to right a lot of wrongs here. So, if it does come to it, who do you think's got it this time? Will the Suns power through and redeem themselves, or will this be more of the same? Let me know what you think in the comment section. Also, hit the like button and sub if you enjoyed, while hitting the bell next to my name if you want notifications every time a new video drops. Appreciate you watching, and I'll see you all on the next one.